Emotions are easy for some to control, but for others, they can be a constant battle. In the workplace, you can see the same challenges. You have to control your emotions, the way you come across, your anger, happiness, and sadness. If you're lucky, you find this easy, and you're able to stay balanced. If you're someone who finds this difficult, this lesson's going to give you a kickstart you need. Your emotional intelligence, or EQ, impacts your leadership or management style. Also, the way you interact with your team and your future prospects. This lesson is geared to give you the control you need to manage yourself and to effectively use EQ to develop your persuasion skills. I want to welcome you all to this lesson. Here is our quote of the day. When dealing with people, remember, you are not dealing with creatures of logic, but with creatures of emotion. With that, today's lesson is going to be about your guide to EQ and how to use persuasion. Our objectives include the following: your EQ introduction, EQ tools and approaches, and finally, the power of persuasion. I want to kick us off with a question. What percentage of managers said that they would be more likely to promote an employee with high emotional intelligence? Our options are 75%, 60%, and 42%. I like this question a lot because not only does EQ impact how you manage your own emotions, but also it impacts your future prospects. EQ is just as valued as IQ, and we're going to discover why during this lesson. Keep in mind that this section will give you the key concepts that you need to know when working with EQ. 75% of careers are derailed for reasons related to emotional competency, including the inability to handle interpersonal problems, unsatisfactory team relationships during times of difficulty or conflict, or it is the inability to adapt to change or elicit trust. EQ impacts all aspects of your life, and as people, this gives us the tool we need to navigate our own emotions. EQ is another key element to add to your leadership and management competencies. Here's an easy way to understand EQ. Emotional intelligence is the ability to validate reason with emotion and use emotions to enhance thought. EQ refers to an individual's ability to perceive, control, evaluate, and express emotions. We see that people with high EQ can manage emotions, use their emotions to facilitate thinking, understand emotional meaning, and accurately perceive other people's emotions. So moving on, let's understand the difference between EQ and IQ. EQ is the ability to identify, assess, and control your emotions, other people's emotions, and group emotions. We see that you can use this skill to understand, control, and express your emotions. Then you use EQ to understand other people's emotions. EQ is used to facilitate thinking and looking at the meaning behind people's actions. In the workplace, you use EQ in team leadership or management. We see that great managers or leaders use EQ when working with other people. You can use it when working with customers, when interacting with others, and when you're dealing with setbacks and you have to manage your own emotions. On the other side, we have IQ. IQ is a score that you get from taking one of several standardized tests to assess your intelligence. IQ looks at your ability to learn, understand, and use logic. It also looks at your comprehension, math skills, and other areas that determine your intelligence. IQ testing goes back as far as 1905, when in France they started to test school children. In the workplace, you will use IQ to problem solve, analyze situations, and to research and develop. As you can see, both of these approaches bring something new to the table. It is clear to see why EQ has grown so much in its importance in recent years. Not only does a company value IQ, but EQ gives you the edge when working with customers, colleagues, and dealing with your own set of emotions. Companies want the balance between the two. With a clear distinction between IQ and EQ, let's look at how leaders can use EQ more effectively. Once you have the ability to manage your own emotions, all opportunities open up to you. In life, setbacks and disappointments are part of the deal. Some people face these setbacks every day and they have no choice but to move forward. Well, EQ gives you the tools to understand your emotions. EQ gives you the abilities to stay in control and allow yourself to work through those emotions. This impacts your work and ability to work with others. Once you have that control, anything can come your way. Good or bad, you have the tools to deal with anything. This means if change occurs, or if you have setbacks at work, it won't impact your personal life. You're able to keep your team going and yourself. As leaders and managers, it is important for us to understand our own emotions and then extend it to our teams. We firstly have to focus on ourselves before looking out for others. A lot of the time, self-motivation is underrated. A lot of the time, you can see people getting obsessed with achieving something. Then, in the process, they burn out. EQ allows you to bridge the gap and give you a healthy way to cope and keep motivating yourself and those around you. Once you have a clear understanding of how you perceive and manage your emotions, you're able to see your own patterns. You can start to stop yourself from becoming negative, becoming toxic, or taking your frustrations out on others. This is a great tool to give yourself the edge and comfort that you need in the workplace. Let's have a look at the top characteristics of EQ. You can use these to identify your own strengths and weaknesses, as well as extending that evaluation to your team. Self-awareness allows people to understand their own actions and how it impacts those around them. When you have a high level of self-awareness, you won't let your emotions rule you. With self-awareness comes self-evaluation. This means taking time to use a SWOT analysis and assess your EQ. Next up, this tool allows you to regulate your impulses. With self-regulation comes grit and discipline. You're able to control your anger, use the tools you need to control your emotions, and it allows you to be consistent. We reviewed grit in Module 1, and it's coming back in Module 2. A lot of these business terms apply to all aspects of the company and leadership. It's understanding how to use all of these tools and apply them effectively. Moving on. Next up, we have motivation. Motivation is interesting if you think of how easy we can give up on something. People can lose motivation as soon as the first hurdle comes up. With a high EQ, you will have the tools to create a long-term motivation for yourself and for your team. But I also know it's not that easy. Dusting yourself off and having the motivation to keep going takes time. EQ helps you deal with those emotions effectively in order for you to be successful. Empathy opens a lot of doors. As soon as you're able to understand people better, you'll be able to understand their wants and needs. You're able to make better connections with those around you. You can see the issue from other people's perspective and extend empathy. Empathy allows you to make better decisions and also relate better to your team. EQ also allows you to improve your social skills. These skills allow you to better work with others and get comfortable in social situations. As you can see, all of these characteristics have a run-on effect. If you're able to apply one, the others will start to develop. It takes the commitment to invest in your EQ. While you guys take all of that in, here's a quick sneak peek of what is coming up next. In Lesson 4, we're going to discover the world of conflict management. The first half of Module 2 is devoted to your team management skills. This is going to be a great addition to your management and leadership skill set. But for now, let's have a look at topic number 2. Here we're going to look at EQ tools and approaches. So this is the part of the lesson where I give you guys approaches and tools that you can start to apply these terms. So how can you increase your EQ as a leader? It's about finding the balance between being understanding, passive, and being aggressive. You want to find an assertive communication style to increase your own EQ. This means, as a leader, that you are able to effectively manage your emotions and help those around you manage theirs. Avoid being aggressive or too direct when coaching others. Have an assertive communication style will help you understand the employee situations and make effective changes. Next, you want to respond instead of react to conflict. This means that you are collecting yourself, thinking of the outcome that you want, and then responding. When you're reacting to conflict without processing information, it can lead to outbursts, anger, and you can lose the respect of your colleagues and your team. Active listening will help you increase your EQ. This gives you the tools to practice empathy and understand your employees. You can respond better by using EQ and also coaching employees with low EQ. When you're able to motivate yourself, it leads to better team motivation. Set your long-term goals and establish your own pitfalls. For example, you know when you get feedback, you tend to shut down. Thus, you have to create a strategy to overcome negative feedback. Your attitude impacts your ability to learn new things. Be positive through your EQ learning process. I know this is easier said than done, but this gives you the opportunity to assess your thinking patterns and behaviors. Use this step to self-evaluate and reflect. This is also a very good exercise to take to your team. Lastly, be approachable. For your EQ to increase, you need to be around other people. Practice your new skills and ask for feedback. If you're uncomfortable with feedback, get someone that you trust and confide in. Over time, you will start to challenge yourself and ask for more feedback from others. Now that you have approaches to increase your EQ, I have some signs you need to keep an eye out when it comes to low EQ. This is a great page to review when you're completing your self-evaluation, as well as bringing this exercise to your team. This is an interesting page as it gives you a bit more insight of how someone reacts when they have a low EQ. Keep in mind, if someone does something on the list once or twice, it might not mean that they have low EQ. They might just be going through something. No, these signs indicate a low EQ when they are frequently displayed, so keep that in mind as we're reviewing the different signs. Someone with low EQ can tend to be in a lot of arguments. Due to the fact that they struggle to understand someone's feelings, they might care more about giving their opinion, and they don't understand or don't care how that impacts other people. People with low EQ can struggle with dealing with other people's emotions. They can come across as direct and without tact in conversations. They can also struggle to read the room or situation, and they can call others oversensitive, as they struggle to understand the extent of the emotions that the other person is going through. Refusing to listen to others on a frequent basis can indicate low EQ. These individuals can feel the need to always defend their stance and struggle to understand the opinions of others. They feel personally attacked when you have a different opinion to what they have. Next up, another sign of low EQ is shifting blame. These individuals might struggle to be wrong and they cannot deal with the failure or negativity in general. They can become very defensive and look for ways out instead of taking responsibility. Lastly, we see the sudden and frequent emotional outbursts that are associated with low EQ. These individuals can struggle to deal with their own emotions, which can lead to a lot of anger and feeling trapped. As a result, they can lash out and negatively impact those around them. Okay, so here's the good news. If you're shocked or uncomfortable with any of these signs, don't stress. All of these are able to be corrected if you commit to change. This means being honest with yourself and setting up a plan. On the other side, if you see a lot of these signs in one of your employees, a plan is needed. So with that, let's look at some tools that you can use to set up a plan. There are several EQ tests that you can take online. I suggest the Mind Tools one. You can Google EQ test Mind Tools. There are several leadership EQ tests that you can take to make sure that you understand your own EQ assessment and you can pass it on to your team. Based on the outcome of your assessment, I suggest that you create a SWOT analysis. Outline your EQ strengths and weaknesses, the opportunities you have to improve, and the threats that you are facing. As soon as you've completed your SWOT analysis, move on to your SMART goals. Use your SMART goal system to create your plan of action. You can either create a list of EQ skills you want to improve, or take one skill at a time and set up your SMART goals. Remember, Module 1 outlines your SMART goal process. Finally, you can also check out some EQ exercises that you can share with your team and that you can try out. These are fun online exercises that I suggest you check out. Simply Google EQ leadership exercises. This helps you to understand where you're at, how you can improve, and a lot of these things are small exercises that you can use on a daily basis. So let's see what happens when EQ is effectively managed and implemented within a company. When you have a good handle on EQ, you're able to manage change more effectively. You're able to set up social systems and take into account what your employees need. By understanding how they will react and why, you're better able to manage the change. Your empathy will also help you lead the team through times of tough change. This point is coming up later in this lesson. When you understand others, you can use the power of persuasion to inspire, motivate, and be a better leader. Stress management is such an important skill. Stress is unavoidable, but how you manage that stress is in your control. I think as an employee, as a leader, and as an individual, we forget how we manage stress is up to us. EQ gives you the ability to better manage your own stress as you understand the process that you need to take on. Same with your team. You need to know how to manage the stress better and help your employees through tough times. All of this leads you to become a better coach. When you improve, your coaching improves, and when your coaching improves, you will have better employees. You can help employees who have low EQ or help employees through tough times because you understand them and you have the tools to help them through it. Now that we understand the benefits, I also want to share with you what happens when EQ is not present in the workplace. When there is a lack of EQ in the workplace, a lot of these things can occur. We see managers overreacting, employees overreacting. We see bullying. We see a lack of civility, personal attacks on employees, management, and the company. We see employees and management undermining each other, and people being petty and destructive. With all of these things, it is not a workplace where you want to be. The lack of EQ impacts your team culture. Everything becomes toxic and negative due to the lack of control and understanding from individuals when it comes to their emotions. Eric Jensen said, "There is no separation of mind and emotions. Emotions, thinking, and learning are all linked. If you are in a position of power, start working on your EQ and then extending it to your team. You will never look back and you will reap the benefits of EQ in every aspect of your company." I want to give you guys a quick brain break before we move on to persuasion. Did you know? In 33 workplace skills, emotional intelligence ranks number 1 in importance. 90% of top performers have above average emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is responsible for 58% of job performance. Lastly, 75% of the Fortune 500 use some kind of emotional intelligence training. These are astonishing stats to know, and we can see that companies understand the importance of EQ. This brings us to the last section of this lesson, the power of persuasion. The triumph of persuasion over force is the sign of a civilized society. If you think about it, persuasion is the sneaky way that you can influence people around you. It creates a win-win situation. Instead of forcing or intimidating someone, you can use persuasion to have someone change or buy into an idea or a certain way of doing something. As a leader or manager, the skill comes in handy every time you speak to someone. You need to inspire, motivate, correct behavior, and it can be impossible if you are fighting someone every step of the way. That is where persuasion comes in. Persuasion is the ability to convince others to change their actions, decisions, opinions, or thinking. Mastering this competency is the way leaders become great at working with their peers and with subordinates. Persuading people in general means that you are polite, friendly, trustworthy, and knowledgeable. When you have EQ in place, this becomes easier and you are able to persuade a lot of people. Because you understand people, you have the skills to manage your own emotions and you're able to stay calm in tough situations, which will help you to persuade others. Okay, so let's look at the different types of persuasion that you can use. Writers use these types of persuasions when appealing to readers, and we're going to do the same. You select a type of persuasion based on the person or group that you're working with. Also, think of the outcome that you want from the persuasion. With this type, you appeal to the morality or ethics of the person you want to persuade. This doesn't work if you don't display these characteristics yourself. You need to be a credible leader or manager to use this type of persuasion. People need to be able to trust you in order to believe what you're saying. This is when you appeal to the logical reasoning of the person or group that you're trying to persuade. For example, if we all as a team meet our deadlines or goals, we will be able to get commission. There are clear rewards and consequences, and it is not based on emotion. It's a very clear-cut way to persuade the other person. But keep in mind, if this does not appeal to the person you're trying to persuade, it won't work, even if it is logical and it makes sense to you. Lastly, we see, here you invoke emotion as a call to action. You appeal to the emotions of the person or group as your means of persuasion. Here you can inspire and motivate with a wide variety of emotions. Leaders can use empathy, anger, fear, and excitement to invoke emotions. With all of these types, it comes down to the person or group. That being said, most leaders gravitate towards using their chosen communication style, and they stick to that even when using persuasion. So keep in mind the way that you are currently communicating and if it is enabling you to achieve your goals. So how can you actually use persuasion? According to Applied Vision Works, people are more likely to follow someone that they think is credible. Here you have two options. Either establish your own credibility by using your knowledge. For example, have a workshop or class or course where you share your knowledge related to a specific topic. Or you can establish your credibility based on a relationship that you have. For example, you can bring in an expert to update your team. This step is very interesting. A lot of time, leaders will motivate why the idea or concept is good in general, but they won't make it relatable. Here you want to make it clear how the idea or proposal is good for the audience or the person you're trying to persuade. The best approach is to understand the needs of the audience and relate it back to them. Next up, this might go without saying, but it is essential to provide evidence. People are more likely to be persuaded when they see the evidence. You want to use a mix of hard evidence that highlights stats and numbers, as well as emotional data about what people have experienced in their past. Here you're exposing yourself and your emotions. You want to display how committed you are to the cause or idea and why you believe in it. Unlike the emotional evidence in step 3, where you look at other people's emotions, in step 4, you want to convince the audience or person you're trying to persuade that you are invested. Top tip here, read the room. Don't go too emotional as it can discredit you. Find the balance to get that emotional connection. Next up, let's look at how we can use persuasion when it comes to different personalities. This is a great approach from Susan Madsen, and she explains it so well that I wanted to share it with you all. It's a short clip, and she's going to look at the different approaches that you can take as a manager and leader, and also relate it to yourself. I hope you guys enjoyed just as much as I did.
Hi, I'm Susanne Madsen. Welcome to this whiteboard session on how to influence different types of people. In order to look at the different types of people we have, I have drawn up a matrix, and we're going to go through 4 different types of people. We're all a mix of all of them, but let's see if you can spot which one is most descriptive of yourself. On your left-hand side, you will see that we have someone who is task-oriented, detail-oriented, and a thinker. And on your right-hand side, we have someone who is much more people-oriented, big picture, and a feeler. Towards the bottom of the screen, we have someone who is more reserved and slow-paced. And at the top, we have the opposite, someone who's outgoing and assertive and much more fast-paced. That gives us these 4 basic types. Let's start with the red, with the driver. The driver is detail-oriented. but impatient in an organization that typically your CEO types. They like results, and the way to influence them is by getting to the point quickly. They like the detail, but they don't have time for the detail, which is a bit of a dichotomy. So give them the executive summary and bullets and let them drive the rest. Let them ask into the detail. Tell them that you have it, and you must absolutely also have it with you. Never say you have it without having the detail there. Now moving to the yellow personality type. These are expressives. They're outgoing, fast, but they're people-oriented, they're feelers. In an organization, they're typically your salespeople and your marketing people. They like fun. So how to influence them? Well, don't send them long, detailed emails because they may never check their email and certainly not read it if it's a long one. What they would appreciate is that you drop by their desk or you give them a quick phone call. And when you speak to them, make it a bit more fun and outgoing. Make them talk. They like to talk. Ask them how they're doing, how their weekend was. So make it a little bit more lighthearted before you get down to business. Now let's move down and look at the green personality type. These are amiables. Amiables are more reserved and slow-paced, but they're still feelers. These people don't like too much change. They're really all about harmony. They're great listeners, great team players, and in an organization, they're typically your HR professionals or caring professionals. The way to influence them is to sit down, have a one-on-one conversation, and ask them how they're feeling, and give them time to consider their responses. They do not appreciate being put on the spot. Remember, harmony is very important to them. Moving to the last personality type, the blue. These are analyticals. They're driven by compliance and by doing things right. In an organization, they're typically your IT professionals or your accountants and analysts. They are driven by detail and they're reserved. So a good way to influence them is actually through the written media, through email. And they do appreciate the detail. So you can imagine now what happens if someone from a sales department calls someone from the technical department and says, "Can you give me a quick estimate by 4 o'clock?" Now, these people down here don't do quick estimates. They like to do things thoroughly and properly, and that takes time. So such a message is going to frustrate them quite a lot. So my question to you now is, which personality type are you? Are you predominantly red, yellow, green, or blue? That's important because you will tend to communicate from your own preference. But what needs to happen if you want to really influence people is that you need to adapt your style to wherever your stakeholder is, or the senior executive, or your team member, wherever that person is that you want to influence. Adapt your style.
I hope you guys enjoyed her insight and found it really useful. I think this is a great approach and it truly adds value to your persuasion approaches. This brings us to the end of the lesson, and I would like to recap some housekeeping slides with you all. Is Shaw Academy living up to our mission? Are you finding the courses flexible and engaging? Are you learning your way? And have you mastered practical skills? At Shaw, we want to focus on real success and help you to reach your goals. This brings me to remind you of your first weekly assignment. These are not for marks, but they will definitely help you prepare for the final module. Just a little hint that some of the questions at the end may look familiar if you've done the weekly assignment. If you get any of the questions incorrect, don't worry. I've prepared a short explanation to help refresh your memory. Just a reminder to check out your toolkit items where you will find your module notes, lesson slides, and bonus content. Well done for completing Lesson 3 of Module 2. In Lesson 4, we're going to focus on your conflict management skills, and it's going to be a great lesson to look forward to. That brings me to share the lesson challenge with you all. Take your first EQ assessment and see where you're at. Once you've done that, complete your SWOT analysis related to your EQ. Then think of a project or idea that you can use to practice your persuasion skills on. Finally, take the ideal project to your team and apply the persuasion steps and approaches to different personalities. Thank you all for attending this lesson. The final quote of the day is the following: One of the best ways to persuade others is with your ears, by listening to them, by Dean Rusk. Have a great day, and I hope that you're excited for lesson 4. I will speak to you all soon.